July 20th, 2017 at the Computer History Museum. David Rock and with me,
Doug Fairbairn.
Right.
with Dick
With
Kramlich,
Kramlich.
of course. I wanted to actually go back in time
Sure.
to start this session and talk to you. We've talked a lot about financing of technology. I wanted to talk a little bit, if we could, about technologies used in finance. That is
Good idea.
kind of the tools used by you and your peers and colleagues in venture investing and financing new or existing firms. So thinking of your first real decade of investing work, the 70s, let's
Right.
say, I wondered if you could describe to us what sort of tools and technologies did you use yourself, your office, in the venture investing field to do your work in terms of communication, research,
Right.
financial calculations, what have you. What was it like?
Pre-internet, let's see. As I recall, it was largely the main means of communication, which were TV, radio, and newspapers.
And
I'd say that was really, and telephone. Those were really the main vehicles. Computers were there, of course, but we were using them more for execution than for information.
By execution, you mean?
Well, I mean, in order to achieve the ends technologically that we wanted to achieve.
Right.
It was a lot of algorithmic work and things like that.
In thinking about how to analyze the terms of a deal, or come up with the terms of a deal, or project the future values of things, and was that pencil and paper? Was that people using calculators?
Of course.
How did that work?
It was calculators, right. But we were using, in terms of terms, that was, in the 70s, was Arthur and myself. And we just were a two-man office with one secretary. And we never got too far away from being a pretty pure term-based VC, I would say. We had terms that were fair but not excruciating for anybody.
So they were simple.
They were
in a
simple
way.
terms, right. And we actually haven't changed that too much. I found that works. Yeah. We never tried to take advantage of the situation, and we were very fair-minded. And I found most of our colleagues were pretty fair-minded. So it wasn't, that wasn't where you made your wins and losses.
We've talked earlier about how important it was in terms of what a key that people and their characteristics, their knowledge, their experience, their talents were to the success or failure of the different ventures. And I was wondering if that personal communication and personal connection was perhaps more important earlier for getting information, evaluating technologies, getting opinions on different fields, getting actually the advice of individuals, or has that stayed the same?
It was more concentrated. I mean, there were fewer people. I mean, it was after the semiconductor evolution had started, and that led to people who were really very knowledgeable about computational issues, and things like optoelectronics, and in the life science area, certain forms of medicine were beginning to revolutionize. So all those, it led to some breakthroughs, and then to the level that you had access to the scientists who are really responsible for that. It was really in a way, a more direct approach to validating whatever kind of breakthrough was being proposed in order to start a new company.
I'd say fewer experts, if you will.
Fewer experts, but deep.
Yeah.
be deep, and they were the originators. So they really, when Arthur and I had Bob Noyce and Gordon Moore and Henry Singleton and Jay Last and all these people as our LPs.
Oh.
So we brought them into the mix, and that was from 69 to 76.
Right. And you could go to them for
We did it all the time.
Yeah.
Talk to them directly, and some of them had very high barriers to entry, and others had a different slant on it. If they
When
saw
you say
something.
they had a higher barrier of entry, what are you referring to?
That their standards for breakthroughs were
Right.
high, I would say. Yes. So it's and you ask, how has that changed? Well, we've had a much greater population of people who have gone through educational experiences that have qualified them in certain ways, and also experience in running and developing companies. So it's a much broader spectrum, and levels of expertise that are largely more intermediate. Some people have, but there are fewer people who really have proven the mettle. I mean, look at Mark Zuckerberg, for example. I mean, he defied all the odds. I mean, it's really great achievement. He's lived up to it. Not many people have. He's great.
So while we're on this topic of things that have changed and how things have evolved, you mentioned that you started out with very early. When you started with simple terms, fair-minded kind of approach, and that has served you well ongoing.
Right.
What about? And you said that's the way the other people at the time, the other VCs at the time were operating.
They were.
Has that changed over time?
Yes.
And can you talk about the evolution of venture capital, especially in terms of the collegiality or not of the organizations?
Well, I mean, let's just take Snap as an example. The fellow at Lightspeed who went in there and put in these terms, and the entrepreneur never read the paper. And he really didn't realize that all future financing had to be approved by the investor. And it took the debate away from the entrepreneur and really put it in the hands of the investor and things like that. And he, as a consequence of that, I think then the entrepreneur overreacted as to his future financings, all of which led to sort of a unrealistic evolution of their going public at a time where they were only 3 years old, and in order just to get out of the problem that was done by the terms that were put down by the first investor. And he created a real animosity between the company and the investor. And other than some, there have been exceptions to this, but that didn't happen all that much, even for somebody like Steve Jobs, who was very explicit about what he expected, but I think that they were willing to work with the terms that were dealt.
So, is there, especially thinking back in over the last 10 or 15 years, are there continue to be firms that you have worked with on a regular basis that you have this very collegial or positive relationship similar to what you had started out with, and are there firms that you just prefer not to do business with in terms of their approach? You don't have to name any.
I know. The answer is, for the most part, yes. There are certain other extremes that are not tied to legal documents, where behavior approaches can be very much of a turnoff, but not too many.
Not too many.
Yeah, right. And the best ones are definitely not too many.
Thinking about the change of, as institutional investors become a larger and larger factor in terms of who are the limited partners.
Right.
It seems that you have fewer and fewer Henry Singletons or Jay Lasts, as a limited partner, and more these institutional investors. Does that, so you can't turn to an institutional investor and say, what do you think about this or that technology? Has that changed how you get advice from these knowledgeable experts? Have you had to
I know.
find
I just
different
don't.
ways?
You just don't. If I would just try to answer that.
Yeah.
David, I think that you don't really turn to your investors for advice very often. I mean, you have to answer to them ex post facto, but not in the beginning of these things. I mean, they expect you to have your own sources of information, your own sources of evaluation, and that's part of their evaluation of whether they want to become a limited partner or not. And you have to demonstrate that you can think ahead of the curve, and that you have resources that will take you ahead of that, and you have a practice that exemplifies your success or failure in that.
Right. Okay. Right. So you wouldn't be asking them in any event because they're looking at you to have that analytical
They do.
capability.
And I've always said
Yeah.
that our job was seeing around corners, and if you want to see around a corner, you have to stand on the corner. I mean, that's a real. That happens to be the way it is, and so it's the responsibility of a well-performing VC to be tuned in enough to what's going on technologically as well as economically and legally to be able to have a reasoned and long-term point of view at the time you make those decisions.
One of these instances of seeing around a corner, I think, was early in the Apple computer story.
Correct.
You were there, and this was to see some people seeing around, I think it was 1979, that the combination of the Apple II and the spreadsheet
Right.
was going to be a profound development.
It was.
I wondered if you, how you saw all that unfold.
Well, we saw it at Apple through the rapid escalation of orders. I mean, it was an amazingly straightforward situation. And when the spreadsheet came up, that actually opened up a whole new application bank. And I think that there were others as well, but it certainly put together multiplier effects.
Do you remember when you first saw that? Did it have that impact on you when you
It
first
did.
saw it?
It did. And I'm not the most scientific guy in the world, but I'm smart enough to, and I've been put at the right place at the right time to be able and open to new ideas, so that I saw the manifestation of that, Doug, very definitely. I mean, I saw it in its good forms and its bad forms. And I saw some missed opportunities. And it was, it's usually sort of a tragedy when you see that, because it was so obvious that this was a multiplier effect in a big way, to take software and tie it with hardware. It was really, that was the beginning of the software revolution, really. Which turns out to be, a driver now going forward all the way to cloud computing.
Absolutely.
Did you at some point, after seeing this combination
Yeah.
of this new financial tool
Right.
and the personal computer, did that start to come into, I guess at this time, it was New Enterprise Associates?
We were,
Yeah.
well, yes, that was, we were formed in 1978.
Okay, right around this
Right,
time.
and the Apple financing had taken place in November of 77.
Did you start to incorporate personal computers and the use of spreadsheets
We
in your own firm?
Yes.
At that time?
Yeah,
Okay.
very definitely. When we got involved, and it wasn't long after that I, of course, ran into Bob Metcalf and that whole thing that you and I talked about earlier.
Right.
But it was obvious to me that that was a symbol of what was going on, because if the personal computer was going to add that much productivity to an individual, the idea of a work group computer group, which included storage as well as calculations and other things, and communications, if that were all going to be bundled, it was clear to me that that was another multiplier effect. And then that's when software became very much of an implementation and valuable to the enterprise.
And did that, in thinking about the spreadsheet, the name of the first spreadsheet, VisiCalc, was
Right.
a kind of a contraction of visible calculator.
That's right.
And that made me think about something that we had talked about before, that's this graphical
Right.
dimension of computing that was very,
Right.
that you saw as being critical,
Right.
and it's turned out to be critical. Did you see that connection with the spreadsheet, seeing it recalculate, seeing?
Yes, definitely, right. And again, I'm pretty common sense guy, and I could see that very obviously to me. And that was, Corey, we had talked in the past about forethought and, about PowerPoint.
Right.
I was just reflecting on that the other day. I was thinking about how, fundamental that was, and here it was, and if I get it right, it must have been about 1983 or 4, somewhere in that range, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. When it first started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think when we announced it in April of, maybe it was 85 or
87,
87, I
Does
think,
that-
yeah.
Yeah.
And that was the year I left the board at 3Com. But that was about that time. And I was thinking of that then to now, there hasn't been anything that's actually substituted for that breakthrough.
No.
Just think of that. I mean, 87 to 97 to 07 to 17.
Yeah.
I mean, 30 years.
It's 30 years this
30
year.
years and a single product now in the hands of Microsoft dominates.
Well, and if you think about it,
That's amazing.
its competition are essentially clones.
That's right.
Google Slides
Right.
and
Keynote from Apple.
Keynote, and then some free and open source versions, but they are all 100% on the pattern of
They are.
PowerPoint.
I know. It was
so
amazing.
it's astonishing.
It's astonishing.
Yeah,
I mean,
and-
there's a real life lesson in that.
Yeah.
Once in a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right.
And in some ways, I think the spreadsheet also, in a way, falls into this
Totally.
category too, where
Yep.
it's so ubiquitous that it even seems strange that it has a history, because it's like, what's the history of a hammer?
Right.
It's not something that
No,
seems
it's
like
really
it.
true.
Well, yeah, I mean, both of them existed in exactly those forms, in paper form, right? I mean, we
They did.
made foils and we made spreadsheets, and
That's right.
in exactly that graphical format.
Right.
And all we did was put, automated a format that had been used for decades, many more decades than that
Right.
beforehand, right?
Yeah.
And,
It makes me think of when I was graduating from Harvard Business School, and I ran into one of the deans walking across the campus. I don't think I mentioned this to you. And he said to me, "Dick, I understand that that you don't care for this place very much." And I said, "Well, that's not really true. I have a lot of respect for it." He said, "Well, no, I've heard, And I said, "Well, look, I have 2 basic problems that I find that you haven't addressed here." And he said, "What are those?" I said, "Number 1, you only have one course that deals with entrepreneurs, and that one is difficult to get into, and it's really it's not billed as an entrepreneurial course. It's called manufacturing."
Right.
And that was overloaded with people wanting to take it because it had a spirit that we need to awaken in this country. But I think so. You need to really think about your entrepreneurial, responsibilities here. This is more than the Fortune 50. It's more than the gray flannel suit and all that kind of thing. And he said, "Okay, that's fair. That's one." And I said, "The other one is that you don't give people the right to or the ability to use tools that are going to make their life better and more efficient." And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, what I have here is a slide rule. And that's a pretty awkward way of getting to the right answer. And you can allow calculators in the classroom and stuff like that." I said, you're shortchanging the future." And he said, well, yeah, our second best graduate since World War II has just started a company in Boise, Idaho, and if I called him and asked you to fly you out there, would you go? And I said, of course. So anyway, that was, and I didn't happen to take that job, but that was my entry level into the corporate world, which I did for 5 years and decided that it's not for me.
Right.
Right. So anyway, but
Yeah.
it was a good experience, by the way. I learned a lot, and I've been able to apply that ever since. I was manager of financial planning at the Kroger Company, and we're going through a transformative period.
Computerizing Kroger,
Computerizing
as I recall.
it, totally.
And in the finance dimension of Kroger, is
Right.
that correct?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and systematizing our decision-making process. I mean, you don't have to be a scientist to know that, but it makes things a lot better if you have a process whereby you can not do things on an ad hoc basis.
Right.
So that was good.
Well,
So he and I got along well after we got that cleared up.
Got that out of the way.
out of the way.
Yeah, right.
At what point did you yourself start using a computer? When did a computer appear on your desk, or has it appeared on your desk?
Well, right now my computer is in my pocket.
Was it on your desk
The
for
Macintosh
a time?
was the first one that
Okay.
I really used.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was, my kind of computer,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm not a scientist.
Right.
And I use it for really rudimentary purposes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my approach is different than most other people's. I basically do everything in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a shortcoming for a lot of people, including me. But anyway, I think a lot.
Right.
I don't do a lot. I think a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in dimensions, actually. I mean, I'm pretty good at that. And I really, as a historian, as you know, that's what I majored in.
Mm-hmm.
I really think of how we got to where we are, what are the dimensions, where are we going forward, and the values that have to do with accomplishing things. I've always been in favor of the entrepreneur, and what is going to allow that entrepreneur to change and disrupt common practices for the better, for more productivity, and spread it across a society of people. I mean, that's my modus operandi. And so you're going to find other people who are 10 times better in any execution of any sort of science or development in a sort of a process or in a way. I mean, they're going to be better at it than I am. But I go largely on instinct, and I change the instincts all the time. Calculated risks, and so that's been my MO.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so I don't take. And people say, you don't use. What? And I said, well, really, I just keep myself informed.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a voracious reader,
Mm.
and I still like newspapers.
Yeah, me too.
And because I can see where I can start and where I can end, I actually get a whole picture of. I mean, I think the Financial Times is a work of art, so I have a whole different process than 99% of the VCs out here. And I find if I couple myself with people who are really complements to that, it really works well.
Yeah.
And they're in tune with everything that's current. So I try hard to not put myself in any particular age bracket.
Right. And it also seems that it's a highly social practice that you have.
Pretty
meeting
much.
people,
Right. I'm-
learning from them,
Yeah,
talking.
I'm not a glad-hander.
Yeah.
I'm not a BSer. And I'm really interested in kind of fundamental values and character and challenges and people's courage. I really go on that a lot. And those are the things that I think have helped to make me somewhat successful.
I didn't mean social to mean
I know.
trite in any way.
I know.
But
I was just clarifying.
people focused. Yeah.
I'm not
yeah.
a-
No. I.
I'm not on any social networks.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
That's not my deal.
Yeah.
I mean,
got
I
it.
don't have, I'm not saying it's wrong or anything like that. I mean, I
Yeah.
think Twitter's great for Donald Trump, I guess. That's not my thing.
Yeah.
I don't use Twitter. I don't use anything.
Okay.
I'm not on Facebook.
Right.
I'm just don't do it.
Right.
I try to stay subterranean and keep the information flowing in and judgments flowing out.
In thinking, in taking you back to before these social networks, really, to the first half of the 1980s,
Yeah.
when you're getting into forethought,
Right.
getting into software, software publishing corporation.
That was a small thing for us. by the way.
Small thing, but it was
But it was
early.
representative.
I
I
was.
liked Fred a lot.
Mhm.
Good man. Fred
They seem
Gibbons.
to have a good run for
He
a
did
while.
have a good run. He
Um,
was great. You know, a lot of others.
Well,
The Learning Company, yeah, like that.
right.
Yeah.
Well, the question I had about that time was, was this when the real transition from the focus of personal computing being kind of from the hobbyist and the very earliest adopters into the business world? Is that the main transition that was going on
I
at
think
this
so.
time?
I think so.
And what did you?
I'm not a coder,
Right.
but I really believe in teaching coding at an early age. That's what I really do believe, that if you don't do that when you're 15 or something, it's a mistake. You have to understand the technology. It's a totally different thing.
Right. Totally different era, I
Yeah,
suppose.
it is. Totally different era.
Um,
Yeah, go ahead, excuse me.
Oh, no, not at
Yeah.
all. I was just wondering what you, as you were, I don't remember you, outside of your investment in Apple, did you invest in other personal computer systems companies? in this
We
time?
did. We invested early on in a company called, it was called
North
the-
Star?
North Star, right. That was actually a great computer.
Mm.
I mean, it was really a great computer. And they got tripped up by their own refusal to keep an open mind. Because they had really developed what the IBM then came out with.
Okay.
And but they had a running head start on it. They were doing great. And their fiscal year was such that it impeded their ability. They were profitable and growing. They could have gone public right then. And we tried to convince them to do it. They didn't do it. Then IBM came out with the 2, and it killed them. They went away. They went from being great to being nothing.
Well,
Too bad.
That's what I was wondering about. That was it. Did it feel like a seismic shift when IBM got into the personal computing game?
Definitely,
Okay.
definitely. They changed the ground rules.
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty great for IBM. Kept them somewhat abreast of things at that point.
And two of the companies from that period that were experiencing what some people have called hypergrowth. One was Compaq,
Right.
and one was Lotus, with Lotus 123, the
Right.
spreadsheet. I just wondered, did you have any kind of perspective on them as competitors to the kind of companies that you were investing
No.
in, or any?
No, they were both somewhat successful, but in different areas. Lotus was, I think, more in many ways more impactful
Okay.
because of the software.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Compaq was a execution play. I thought they did a good job.
That's an interesting distinction, an execution play versus kind of some new thing.
Right.
Huh.
That's the way I would classify it.
Well, as time went on into the through the 80s, the 90s to the present, I was
Right.
just wondering, I was curious to hear your reflection on, in terms of the practice of venture investing or finance in general, the relationship between computers and software and finance itself. Did you see big changes in as computers came into finance, into this whole
Oh,
scene
definitely.
of capital markets?
Oh yeah, it's transformed it completely.
Could you,
Yeah.
if you have some thoughts on that, I'd love to hear them.
Well, I mean, it led to it led to a lot of financial practices that were analytical, and I mean, I can think of a couple of dozen methodologies. I mean, certainly Vanguard changed. Look at what Vanguard did. They sort of systematized and automated the investing process, and other companies, that led to analytical practices that led to, that was part of index funds, of course, and analytical tools that allowed hedge funds to evolve, ultimately led to private equity kind of activities. Yeah, all these things happened, and there are some that really. I have a friend of mine who was one of the developers of the index fund, the first developer of the index
Wow.
fund, actually, and he and I have been friends since early '50s, and he was always in that side of the. He said anytime, I said, I'm not involved in any companies that are doing the output of what you're doing. I'm going to stay out of your territory, because we were always in the invention side of things and the breakthrough side of both life sciences and technology, as opposed to what I call the systematizing or monetizing side of it, and that continues to today. I still see him all the time, and he's getting a couple of awards from university, and he's for having been helpful in breaking through that in booth computing, it's actually the name of the firm is Dimensional Fund Advisors. Are you familiar with that?
No, I'm not.
Look at it someday. You'll see what I mean. What they've done is taken an index fund, tweaked it, and they have done a superior job of, funds flow. If you look at the funds flow today going into securities,
Yes.
and you'll see it's just active management is on the decline, and passive management is way up, and then passive management with instinctive or educated biases to it is way up.
Yes, I have heard of this.
That's what it is. And Dimensional Fund Advisors, which my friend is involved with, was really the progenitor of all that.
And that kind of work couldn't happen without the computer.
Absolutely.
I was thinking this might be the same thing for these other forms of, if you're talking about like how do new companies get access to capital, there are all these other things like high yield bonds and all sorts of fancy instruments. I guess I don't really know what to call them. And I was wondering if these sorts of things, if kind of the computer made those possible.
Oh, of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
You think that's
true?
true?
Oh, definitely. You couldn't really classify and analyze stacks of data without an awful lot of help. And, these algorithmic analyses, all that. You needed the computer in order to do all that. So I know there's no doubt about that.
Okay.
What about the impact on the venture investing world itself? Has it brought in new people who want to make it more analytical? Is it you have a very basic sort of people-oriented approach to investing and that sort of thing. Is there a set of firms that are much more analytical in terms of their approach? And
I'd say definitely, Doug. I'd say that, in fact, it's brought a lot of more intelligence into our world, and I respect it a lot. And as I said, I sort of float in a different stream, but I'm well aware of that, and I recognize it when I see it. And I think it's increased the value of venture investing big time. I really applaud it. And so I think, whereas I'm not a practitioner of it myself, I recognize its value. But I think it's brought in several generations of improvement in terms of the capability of people coming into the business, both those who are willing to go through the learning process on the educational level as well as on a practical level, and people who have started these companies without graduating from school, like Gates and Jobs and Zuckerberg and others.
All the really big successful
All the really
ones,
big
right?
successfuls, because they don't get trapped in it, you see. That's my point. They are well aware of it, but they don't want to get caught up in the routine of, sort of boring to them, of learning too much about it because they don't need it. They're really above it. And I think those kind of minds are the things that have improved a lot of things that we're doing. So I like that. But I think it's changed the nature of venture capital. I think it's a lot more professional in a way than it used to be.
Can it get, I mean, in some cases, does it get carried away? It seems to me that
Yes.
You can analyze the data very,
Right.
very carefully, but the
Right.
data in the venture world is very difficult to come by. The
It's-
inputs are suspect.
Well, it's theoretically, if you're going to get a breakthrough, you can't analyze it.
Right.
And so I think that's why there's room for both.
Right.
That's why there's room for both. And I think, as far as just floating into Green Bay Ventures for a
Yeah,
second,
yeah.
my younger partners in this, they are so smart, wickedly smart. And so we work together very well. And they're very much into the details of what we're talking about, which is artificial intelligence and, other machine learning, all the things that are actually important today. And I think that you have to be pretty flexible about, how you place your bets.
I had one last question
Yeah.
on this connection between kind of computing and finance.
Right.
Unless,
Go ahead, no,
yeah,
go ahead.
Which is currently now there seems like a hot area in investing and interest and technology development around financial technologies or fintech.
Yeah.
I just wondered if you had if that was an area of interest to you.
Well, I've been involved in several. I was seed investor in the financial engines,
Okay.
and that was as good that was taking the Sharp methodology and analyzing the way to invest for 401ks
Okay.
and marrying the two in a process. And that's turned out to be quite successful. And I was involved in Zoom,
Right.
and which is now PayPal.
Oh.
And so that was a pretty good situation. And we're doing one today that's called TransferWise, which is taking, again, money transfers and doing it as opposed to banks, essentially really multiplying that effectiveness by thousands. I mean, it's incredible. We're operating at 70 basis points as opposed to 300 basis points of difference, and making a go at it. And it's making it a lot more receptive to the user. And so all the fintech is very much on my mind a lot. And when I was director of Silicon Valley Bank for 10 years,
Oh, that's right.
yeah, I mean, I was a sponsor of a lot of activities there, and I had a great run, and they sort of discarded my age factor in keeping me on the board 10 years after I should not have been on the board. But I had such a great relationship with those people, and I admire what they've done so much, and had a good quid pro quo and way of doing things together. I think it helped the bank, and if you ask Greg Becker, I think he'll tell you that. And we had a very productive period of time together. It's great.
What was the name of the company that involved in transfer?
It's called TransferWise.
TransferWise.
That's just a new one.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to improve in that area.
This is a
Geez.
major one. I mean, with Zoom, it did a lot of good things, but one thing I hated about it was, I'd have to get it fingerprinted every time we had a board meeting, just about, or we had to get approval from all the states, and it's a bureaucratic nightmare. But it's we complied with it all, because you have to comply in order to do your thing.
Yeah.
So I'm a great believer in compliance.
Of certain kinds, maybe.
certain
Yeah.
kinds, whether I hate it or not. I'm just not a routine kind of guy.
Well, I think then if
I
it's
could just add in one
please.
thing. Since we last talked, of course, I sort of think that we've had a new milestone at NEA, which was raised our 16th fund, which was $3.3 billion. It takes the total committed capital to just under $20 billion now.
Wow.
And and now on to the third generation of management, with Scott Sandell being the managing partner. And I'm very excited about the way that firm has evolved. And about a year ago, the Dean of External Affairs at Harvard Business School, Bill Solomon, had dinner with us at our house, and he said to me, "Dick, I want you to know something." I said, "What's that?" He said, "NEA, in our judgment, is the only firm that's actually scaled." And I said, I never thought of it that way, but you're saying it makes me understand it and realize it, and I thank you for that.
So that is, again, another record-setting size of a fund, is it not?
That's right. Oh, it is. Officially I don't think there's a larger one.
Right. Yeah.
So, we actually did it without much fanfare. And in fact, we weren't even going to release we weren't even going to put it on the wire or anything, not even released it to the Wall Street Journal, but they released it for us.
Yeah.
But that's why we like to keep these things. That's evolutionary within the firm, with quality people who are oriented towards the benefit of the limited partners. And I've mentioned in the past, that's what we really care about. We want to treat the LPs the way we would want to be treated if we were an LP.
And which, through the management company, I think you are, correct?
We are. Right.
Yeah.
We're thinking of the longevity, the fact that, you just don't we've never lost anybody that we felt couldn't do better someplace else. And that's the way it is. We want everybody to have and then we have a semi-permanent pool of capital. It allows us not to lurch from partnership to partnership. So I think it's changed in a subtle way, the way things are done. And I appreciate Benchmark's approach as well, because they're really doing the same thing we did. So I
was
like
about to
that.
say, how much has NEA's strategy influenced other firms?
Not much, because it's not very broadcast and nobody really understands it. And that's fine with me. I don't think so.
But Benchmark has adopted.
They did it out of common sense and on their own approach, value oriented. And the thing that they have done is keep their funds pretty small. Whereas I think what we've been able to do is to use the same ideology, but deal it on a larger basis. So it's just two different ways of looking at it. And they're good people, very good people, outstanding, I'd say. And so I really applaud that. So I just wanted you to know.
Congratulations.
I think that's there. And so now I've been graduated to a chairman emeritus status. And in organizing Green Bay Ventures, NEA was our first limited partner. So that's pretty good.
Which is a great vote of approval.
Yeah,
And I love working with them, and I've never done anything that hasn't been in their best interests. And that's pretty great to be able to say. So.
Yeah, well, and in thinking about your comment about scale,
Right.
it seems that some of the practices that NEA put in place to be a long-lived organization
Right.
are in a way the same practices and structures that allowed it to scale.
That's right. It was actually goal alignment is a big deal. Goal alignment within the firm, and goal alignment with our limited partners and with the companies. and so those things have. Have you ever interviewed Scott Sandell?
No.
When you do, and I hope you do sometime after.
Yeah, he's definitely on our list. He's been
Yeah,
very
you'll find that
strong supporter.
He is the most thoughtful guy you'll ever interview. I can almost guarantee that.
Oh, that's a great recommendation.
Yeah.
Well, if I'd like to switch gears slightly, if I could, and ask you some maybe unfair questions because they're such big picture. But I'd love to, if you have thoughts about it, I'd love to hear your thoughts on some big picture about Silicon Valley, really.
Yeah.
It's been such a part of your life.
Right.
I would be very interested to hear what you think are the most important characteristics of Silicon Valley in terms of its, or just as a center of the action,
Yeah.
So if you could
Well,
share your thoughts on that.
So when we started NEA, we were the first firm that actually started with offices on both coasts. And I'd been here I came out in '69, and Arthur and I were together from '69 to '76, and then I stayed here for a year and studied the PC world and things like that. And then we started NEA really January 1 of 1978. We concluded the first fund on June 6th of 1978. And the reason that we did that was I felt that, and I still hold this today, that it's absolutely a necessity to be in Silicon Valley, but it's also great to be at least in one other place. So you don't have a myopic view of the technology world, which tends to be undercutting, in my judgment, to a broad scale understanding of things. So that philosophy holds today. Whether or not it means having a dozen different offices and places, I find that gets a little confusing. And I don't think you need more than a couple of different worldviews in order to have enough information to make judgments. And so I think about Silicon Valley. I think it's it's where everyone else in the world wants to be, and it's really become very obvious that even the leading industrialists around the world don't feel they can really make a judgment on technology unless they have some information source in Silicon Valley that actually rounds out their point of view. It's that important. And it's a differentiator in the world. And when I was with Silicon Valley Bank, and Silicon Valley Bank was applying for a license in China, Chinese are very brand conscious, among other things. We were treated like we were descended from heaven. I mean, it was really the truth. I mean, the red carpet treatment, and J.P. Morgan wasn't as good as the Silicon Valley Bank, and it was really incredible. And so that's the aura. And then wind up, by the way, getting the first 50-50 joint venture bank agreement since 1994. I mean, that was the end result. They got all the license agreements and everything that you needed. How that's going to play itself out over time, who knows? But we did start out with a huge deposit base. That's a pretty good way to start for a bank. In any event, I think that Silicon Valley gets a little full of itself every once in a while, and believes its own PR, and it tends to make people self-important, and I think that's a danger. And it also has led to some bad practices, and we see it revealed every day, really. And this whole sexism thing that's come about, it's not a surprise. It's as simple as ABC. C is going to follow A and B. And it's just the end result of exploiting an advantage. And so I think it's really important that we tend to have people who are who these kinds of activities are revealed, and I think any kind of a reasonable outcome it's going to create by having this kind of advantage that Silicon Valley has, it creates jealousies around in other places, and I think academically it's important that we don't get overconfident. I think we have to be confident in what we know, but also open to invention elsewhere. And I think a lot of people have taught us that over the last dozen years or more. And so I think the rest of the world is catching up with us, and I think that's a good thing, not a bad thing. I don't think it'll diminish Silicon Valley's importance in terms of entrepreneurial achievement, because there's no infrastructure that's anywhere close to what we have here. With the academic infrastructure, the well-trained entrepreneur going through a startup and learning the ropes, having been a product manager somewhere, which is the best possible trial and error position to be in before starting a company. That's the best thing to be, a product manager, and make a difference in whatever environment you're in. And I think that I think that my original thought about this is it's important to be here, but other places as well, not too many to be confusing, is a pretty good barometer. And I think, look at Greylock. Greylock's a great firm. When I was in Boston, I did a couple of projects with Greylock out there, and their whole point of view was Boston-oriented. You don't hear much about Boston with Greylock anymore. They shifted everything. And give a couple of people there a lot of credit for being able to transform a firm, boom, there to here, keep high quality in both places. That's a pretty great thing to be able to do. And so others haven't done that as well as they have. But so I think that it's, and I think the age, we're sort of an ageist society for the most part.
Yeah.
And I don't have a problem with that. I think it's up to the individual to stay current and stay in shape and stay current. And if you can play the game, I mean, look at professional basketball. Look at tennis. Look at Federer, 35. John McEnroe says he stopped at 25. So it goes with the individual. You have to take the burden on yourself to stay current in whatever field you're in. And that's the challenge that Silicon Valley faces. Getting too self-satisfied, thinking the world begins and ends here, kind of like Rome. Doesn't happen that way. And if you're going to really be successful, you have to spread the religion that you're practicing to other places so that you get people. And I think right now, to what I see going on, and one thing I'm really excited about is because I think the industrial internet has affected the two coasts without affecting middle America too much. I think Rust Belt America has gotten about a 10 to 20% improvement in productivity, but not much more than that. And I think what we're doing right now in taking artificial intelligence and machine learning particularly, and robotics, those fields, and actually implementing them in the manufacturing centers of the United States is going to be a big improvement in productivity for this country. And so I think we're entering a whole new era that has, from a standpoint of financial and economic benefit, just scraped the surface. So I'm really excited about the next era that we're going into, and that's I think that's pretty great. So I think we're going to go into a new era that's going to spread the. Right now, what we've done is enable. When you really think about the big strokes right now, what we've really done is enable the consumer to access product. And you look at why is retailing suffering? It's suffering because pricing power has gone from the manufacturer to the consumer, and it's transformative. We have 10% now of all retail sales are on the online.
Right.
It's fantastic. And so this is only, and now we have other challenges that, actually 80%, 90% of America's population is within 8 miles of a Walmart. And what that really does, and now you have an all-time war going on between Walmart and Amazon.
Yep.
And maybe Amazon is going to the brick and mortar business and Walmart's going the opposite way. We had this company called Jet.com. They got acquired by Walmart for $3 billion. And the guy who ran that, Mark Lohr, is now trying to basically, he was at, his prior company, we got acquired by Amazon. So he knew Amazon from the inside out. This is how bizarre this all is. But he was in the East Coast, and he moved to Seattle, and then he's now, it's an amazing situation. So now he's living in Bentonville.
Middle America.
Isn't that amazing set of circumstances? And so, but it's reflective of what we're doing. So we're going to see a major, world war between Amazon and Walmart. And Walmart is not going to give up. I mean, is their population base similar to Amazon? No. Can they transform? A little bit, maybe more than a little bit. But having, 90% of the country's population within 8 miles, that's pretty amazing.
Pretty good head start.
Pretty good head start. That means they don't have to develop their own delivery system. And Amazon's big challenge is going to be, can they really make that delivery system economical and efficient? So everybody has their challenges. And they've convinced Wall Street that it doesn't need earnings. And, it's a whole different ballgame.
Which I guess is another big
So
head
this
start.
is all part of what I like to follow. And in the process, what I think is that it's created opportunities that are going to be to a different part of our population and our economic and our in our corporate area that hasn't been really dealt with before. And it really it's all about using artificial intelligence for both maintenance, anticipated maintenance. All these activities are so great.
Well,
so I'm tuned in to what's going forward. As much as I like to reflect on the past, it's a prelude.
I have been interested in this whole discussion that you were just talking about, industrial internet.
Yeah.
Some people are calling it fourth industrial revolution.
Right.
I like industrial internet better as a phrase, actually, because I think if you think back to what you saw at 3Com,
right.
with the Metcalfe's law and the
Right.
network effects,
Right.
and this seems to me, in a way, an continuing unfolding
That's right.
of the impact of the network.
That's what it is.
And if it gets into now the parts of the car,
Right.
are connected to the network. What
Right.
does that mean for manufacturing and all these?
It's it's a lot of opportunity. It's what it is. It's going to transform our day-to-day life, like the traffic jams that we had today. That's it's either going to explode or it's going to improve. One of the two. And I'm a great believer that it'll do both. It'll explode and improve.
Right.
When it becomes a necessity. I look at gas stations as free turf. I think it's going to change real estate values. I think there are a lot of byproducts.
I'm sorry, what is going to change real estate values?
The autonomous driving
okay.
and electric cars.
Right.
We went to the Salzburg Festival a year ago. Our next door neighbors down in Florida named Swarovski. They're from Austria. They're great people, and they have asked us to go to the Salzburg Festival several times. So last year we went, and it's great in its own right. But the people who own Porsche live in Salzburg, and so Helmut Swarovski said, "Dick, do you want to go to the Porsche personal family museum?" I said, "I'd love to go there." So we go there, and their family they're very industrially oriented, and so they own Volkswagen, they own all these companies, and so we were going around the factory, and I noticed that there was in the corner there's this fabulous Model A car, And I said, where did that come from? He said, that was delivered to us in 1905 by Thomas Alva Edison. I said, what is it exactly? He says, an all-electric car. And I said, no kidding. Right next to it was a car that was built in 1910 by Porsche. Silver car. It looked like a bullet. Went 100 miles an hour, all electric. All electric. The electricity was in the wheels. And I said to the guide who was taking us through, and their family was over there, I said, why is it that you didn't prosecute this further? And he said, petrol was so cheap. And when I think, if I were putting myself back in history in that time, and I think I'd just discovered oil in Pennsylvania, I might have a different point of view about how I priced that product. And when I saw that electricity was an obvious answer, but that it needed a lot of invention along the way, and Tesla was really there, and he and Edison had a real shootout, and J.P. Morgan was on Edison's side, but he was critical of Edison because he took so long to deliver product. It was one of those things that, I said to myself, we essentially mortgaged 100 years of pollution for a decision. It was based on cheap petrol. When you really analyze that, it's momentous. And maybe we would have done something different if we had understood the consequences of what we were doing. That's just something to think about.
Yeah.
Well, that, if you don't mind, that leads directly into a question that I had to thinking about your perspective on climate change and where Silicon Valley can fit into the story that remains to be written about what happens with that.
Well, I definitely believe that climate change is reality. I think that it's not the worst part about it is it happens very gradually, and it's 0.6 of a degree a year or something like that. And it's not maybe that's even overstating it, but it's not very obvious. But the fact is that it is upon us in a major way. Unless we get it solved by 2050, it's going to chew us up by the end of the century, and we're going to have, about a third of the world will be probably uninhabitable, and that's the consequence of it. Start getting over 127 degrees, it makes it very hard to live, and we've had some climates in the Middle East this year that have reached 127 degrees.
Yeah.
So it really gets serious stuff. As you know, I'm a total advocate for fusion energy.
Right.
And I think that actually it's helped. The problem is helped by wind power and by solar power. There's no doubt about that. The problem in both those cases is storage, and it's also cost, because they range from 9 to 12 cents a kilowatt hour. So they're really expensive. They're going to come down with scale, but we need a magic outcome here. We really do. We need another miracle. Whether we can actually do that still remains to be seen. I think that the international consortium that's funding the ITER project in south of France is false. It's not going to work. I think because it's cost too much. There are 7 countries that are supporting this. We can't afford it in the United States. If we can't afford it, who can afford it?
Yeah.
And I think our Ways and Means Committee is going to shut it down. And there are rumors to that effect. Now, they're using essentially an old Russian technology, and the Russians are part of this, and they know it very well. And they're part of our project too, by the way.
Oh.
And I brought them in myself. And they put in $50 million from Rusatom and Rusnano, 25 from each. And Chubais went on our board, Anatoly Chubais, who's a very well-respected man in Russia. So I said we had these 2 things we had to achieve in order to prove the point, and we achieved sustainability. We are on the course to achieve our temperature. And by the way, the good thing about what's going on in ITER, even though it's going to cost $30 to $40 billion and not be obvious until 2030, they're going to achieve their goal, by the way. And when I talk about it imploding, it's because it's economically not sound. But they're going to achieve their goal. They use a form of technology here called magnetic confinement,
Yeah.
which is really important, and that is sound. That is the core of what you need to do, because this all has to do with plasma.
Right.
And unless you actually are able to control the plasma's more flitting than a cloud.
Yeah.
And so you really have a hard time controlling it. I think that in this second plant that we just completed, if you ever take a trip down there and see it, I got MIT to go down and see it, and they all of a sudden became believers.
Where is the plant?
It's in Irvine, California.
Oh, okay.
I really, if you want me to set it up, I'll be glad to do it. Elon Musk said, if I weren't doing SpaceX, Dick, I'd be doing what you're doing. I mean, that to me is about as good a compliment as anybody could ever have. And we got into it not because of me, it was because of Arno Penzias, who's a Nobel and got it in '76, and he was the one who got us into it and urged me to get into it. I said, look, I did well in chemistry and physics, but I'm sort of a regular guy. And he said, Dick, no, we're going to need you. And I said, I'll do it on 2 counts. Number 1 is you give me a tutoring course in plasma physics. And number 2, no tests. So at any rate, the point is, this is going to transform the world. I'm absolutely convinced of it. We now have evolved our management. We had a really smart guy from Caltech who was really a software guy who was running, and he said, look, this is becoming a little too serious. This is a real company now. We have 800 patents. And he said, it's time we get somebody who really knows what they're doing. So we had on our board Steve Specker, who was the president of GE Nuclear, and then he became the president and then chairman of EPRI, Electronic Power Research Institute. He's a fantastic guy. And he's agreed to be the president for the next several years, CEO, next several years. We elevated our chief technical officer, an Austrian, by the way. His name is Bindenbauer, Michael Bindenbauer. He's now the president and CTO. And we just had joining our board the former Secretary of Energy for the United States, Bernie Munoz.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and he came from MIT.
Yeah.
And professor at MIT. Really, I mean, undoubtedly
Top
guy.
person.
So when I'm talking about, it's not a foreign language. These people, they know every bit. I've had to be self-educated about this, but these people really know the nuances to this. And you know Dick Meserve?
I don't know
he's
that
really
name.
another one who's really, he's a lawyer who has practiced in this area. And it's just, and we've engaged the 3 top utilities in the United States as of 3 years ago to get engaged with this, because this doesn't happen overnight. I think we have to qualify for the Advanced Nuclear Program, which will be in 2030. So we have to start making contractual arrangements earlier than that. And so we've had everybody from the CEO to 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 CFO of all these companies come down, and we're very engaged with them. So we want to be able to start entering into contractual arrangements with the utilities in the United States and abroad. Our headquarters in Geneva. So we think 3/4 of our revenues are going to come, and our part of it, I'll explain in a minute, are going to come from abroad in various places. So this is a serious deal, and I've been lucky enough to be sitting next to Arthur when Intel was formed. I knew a lot about that, Apple and all these other companies. I've seen them all, and I think this one is as important as any that I've seen. And I think it leads to climate change because it's affordable, it's plentiful. The radical thing here is the choice of materials, and we chose boron, proton boron, PB11, and the light end of the periodic table, not the heavy end. Everything else up to this point involving nuclear is all the heavy end of the periodic table. The guy who had the breakthrough on this, his name is Norman Rostocker. He was a physicist from Southern California. He went to CERN and practiced. He ran it through the testing there to see if you can excite boron enough to create its conversion under temperature and pressure to hydrogen, then to helium, then to helium-3. And he found he could, so that's been our mission. And so it's we're using this Russian technology that was under a German physicist who joined after World War II, and he had a laboratory in Siberia. We've been under contract with them for the last 15 years, and we've perfected it and patented it. But it really has to do, as I said, with plasma technology, and so now we're applying that through a series of shots, we call them, and you'll find this Thursday. Today, we're going to announce the fact that we've been working with Google for the last 2 years to improve the algorithms that lead to our perfection of the shots that we're making to increase the outcomes. So that'll help us with the
Using AI.
Using AI, exactly right. So it's really and they own a little bit of the company, and they haven't made any comment about it because they didn't want to. They weren't really quite sure what it was going to wind up being.
Sure.
But I'm really an advocate of this, and I think that we have had a little more than 600 million that's gone into it so far. Compared to 30 billion, it's a bargain.
Yeah.
And our plants are going to be 300 megawatt plants, and our economic model calls for us to get a penny a kilowatt hour.
Wow.
And the end result is the outcome is going to be somewhere, it's going to have to be scaled. 10 plants are going to be where we get scale. But it'll be between 4 and 6 cents a kilowatt hour. Coal is 4 cents a kilowatt hour without remediation.
Right.
And so that adds another penny or two on top of it. So we're basically equivalent to coal. And that's the other great pollutant. So we had oil and coal, carbon society, that we've got to eliminate in order to conquer in an efficient way the climate problem. So
That's
I'm
very exciting.
In favor of all this, and I think that politicians better reckon up with it because it's on our doorstep.
But you're right. It's the slow increase is just people just don't see it, and when they see it, it's too late, right?
That's exactly the point. Precisely, Doug.
It's like warm in the pot a degree at a time. You don't know you're getting boiled, right?
That's right. And all of a sudden you burn the bottom.
Yeah.
And that's the way it is. So that's I totally dedicated to that. I also think, and I don't have a bias on this particularly, but I think Fukushima, and then following that by the bankruptcy of Westinghouse, and the cost of the power plants that are being built by Southern Company in Georgia, spell the end of the nuclear power. I think we've fooled ourselves on the ability to deal with atomic waste, and I think it's time for us to quit that and go on to something better that doesn't involve radioactivity. So I think these are all really serious, big-time problems, and we better get on with it. That's my feeling. That's my answer to climate change.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh,
I'm
by the
glad
way-
I asked the question.
Yeah. One other thing is that we asked McKinsey and Company to do a study of using our beam technology. Could we actually, because the plasma, creates the beams. Is there other uses of this technology?
Oh.
We found there are two. One is in medicine. We found that our beams are useful in being able to kill cancer cells. So that and we just raised $40 million with a $100 million post with external investors. We're calling it Tri-Alpha Life Sciences. And the idea is that these are so precise in their ability to kill cells that you can go in and beam these cells, kill them without disturbing cells on either side. And so that at the end of the day, if the dream is realized at the end of the day, you need no chemotherapy, no radioactive treatment at all. Just kill the cells.
Wow.
And that is, so we have a situation going there. The second thing is we think there also could be great improvement in battery technology
Oh.
using the beams. So that's a little earlier on in the cycle, so we don't have an answer to that. But we have a business model for the company to begin to populate the world and bisect. We have 7 different sectors of the world. We want to give exclusive licenses in various sectors and make it a economically attractive outcome that way.
What's your reasonable expectations to commercialization to actually have a plant up and operating?
I think we're in the middle of doing that right now. We have the business model at a penny a kilowatt hour is part of it, and we have license agreements that are going to do that, and we're working with utilities on the license agreements, and we'll be, I think, before the end of 2018, I think we'll have a business model that we can adhere to, and that we get somebody else to buy into. That's what we have to do. And so now we have, we were a little ahead of schedule on what we C2, we're calling it C2W. The prior one was C2U.
Okay.
You're right, this is
The
C2W.
larger.
And we think that now we have a plant that will pass everybody's muster. And so that's what we want to do. It's a phenomenal. We're getting into the big leagues now, and with kind of guys like the Secretary of Energy, and now our chairman is the chairman of the Board of Trustees at MIT. We have a lot of advocates who have seen enough to make them, believe that we have something of worth here.
That's exciting.
Yeah,
Very exciting.
yeah. So that's all in this, advocacy that I have, that you don't need to be a specialist, but you have to be open to the best in the world.
Right.
And then what a venture capitalist ought to do in this situation is have the ability to attract enough capital that is subject to a lot of scrutiny and a lot of skepticism, that it can pass muster and do something right. So that's my job.
So we're going to have to
Please,
wind up here
yeah.
pretty soon, but I wanted to go back to a less perhaps significant but important question about entrepreneurialism and the differences in Silicon Valley.
Right.
So you've had the perspective of seeing entrepreneurs around the world
Right.
and compared Silicon Valley with other locations and so
Right.
forth. People talk about, well, what's the secret sauce in Silicon Valley in terms of, well, you need universities, you need sources of capital, you need various other things.
Right.
So how would you, and some of these are tangible things you can compare, well, we have this and they have
Right.
that and so forth. How would you compare sort of the cultural mindset, society mindset, and the role that plays in the success of a particular region, both here in Silicon Valley, and especially as compared to even like the East Coast, or Boston, such as we mentioned earlier, and places like China? What are some of the intangible factors which you and how significant do you think those are in the success of an area from an entrepreneurial point of view?
I think they're central. I think everybody loves a winner, and I think we need winners. And I think what's happening in New York is actually pretty exciting, because I read a review the other day of the fact that New York considers itself a center of innovation these days. I mean, what a great thing. I'm all for it. And so I think it's great. And I think China is great. I think China is really a force to be reckoned with, and Alibaba proved that you can do this anywhere. And I think, the other great companies in China like Baidu and Tencent and others. And so I think that China is going to be, the Chinese, there's no more natural entrepreneurial race in the world that's entrepreneurial than Chinese.
Mm-hmm.
They are just they're, I have equated them in the past to New England Yankees
Mm-hmm.
because they are hardworking, they love education, there's no time clock, and the energy is great, they respect success. And so I think China is going to be a very big entrepreneurial force for as far as the eye can see. And I think the United States has broken out of this Silicon Valley envy a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the major thing that we have to do in terms of society here is allow the unicorns to prove their worth.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the big thing. I have a personal point of view about this, and I think we are going to have somebody who's going to change the way the unicorns are dared to go public,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's going to be Dropbox. And I think the economics are going to prove the fact that if you play the game right, you take time to reckon up to challenges and overcome them and become an economically sound activity, that you can attract capital at a good multiplier. I think that's going to, and I think I am wherever the wood is right here, because we have a stake in that in Green Bay Ventures.
Mm-hmm.
I think Dropbox is going to make a difference, and that's what we need
In
to
terms
do.
of setting the model for going public for these unicorn, highly valued
Precisely.
private enterprises.
Right, not loss making, but they're cash flow positive and profit making and growing
Right.
at high with high gross margins and recurring revenue, and have all the business models right.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't need a computer to do all this, but they don't hurt. And but that's what it's going to take. And I think so. That's the lesson. I think in the near term, for us in this part of the world, is we need really good role models that are going to prove to be winners for these unicorns, to differentiate themselves, the winners from the losers. And they'll give you a lot of license. The capital markets will give you licenses, as long as you're, adhering to a business model and achieving your goals, such as Amazon. They've already awarded
Amazon is,
a perfect example of an
right.
extreme situation. But I mean, look at Apple. And everyone has to have a different discussion. But I think that we've seen that. But now we have this backup of 175 or 200 unicorns, and 50 of those are going to be successful. And let's get on with life and unlock some of this capital that's been tied up for so long. I think that's the big risk, and to me, that's the burden of proof that we have right ahead of us. Airbnb, for example.
Right.
Something like that.
Right. So how would you, in terms of Silicon Valley
Yeah.
companies versus other, East Coast, let's just stick to the United States.
Yeah.
How would you characterize the sort of the differences between an East Coast startup or a West Coast startup? Are the successful ones all the same? Do you see different
Okay.
whatever in
Yeah.
those, or is it there's one formula and wherever you get it?
Well, I would differentiate, first of all, between life sciences and technology.
Okay.
So on the life science side, I'd say the East Coast has a lot going for it. In Boston, in New York, in the Middle Atlantic states, Johns Hopkins, other places, and the FDA. They're all there. We are not bad. We have a lot of good things around San Francisco, up in Seattle, down in San Diego, and to a lesser extent in LA. But we're pretty good. Chicago isn't all bad. And then there are other points of places that have outcroppings of good things. But I would say geographically, life sciences are quite a different time span than others. In fact, when I look at how much capital you have tied up for a longer period of time, is really FDA controlled. It's really, benchmarks. You have to
Right.
reach each benchmark. As far as technology, I would say the East Coast is more consumer-oriented than the West Coast, although Los Angeles, you'd have to say, is consumer-oriented in a big way, too.
Right.
These are population-driven. And I think there's a lot more technology that's being developed in the East Coast as well. Boston used to be, I came from Boston to San Francisco. Boston was really where a lot of this started. And it was well done, although their modus operandi was more incremental.
Mhm.
We're here, we take the big risks out here. And so I think Boston is still in there in a way, but I think it's mostly moved down a little bit to the middle Atlantic and other places in Virginia and Pennsylvania and South Carolina and Atlanta and even in Florida. I mean, the East Coast is really has a lot of technology outposts, and some really good work is being done. I mean, the leading people in the country in certain, I mean, this is how idiosyncratic it is. Orlando, Florida has the best space engineers in the United States. Why, of course. Right.
Yeah.
But it's amazing.
Yeah.
And a lot of these things, when it comes to autonomous driving, you use a lot of technology that was used in the space industry. And so you'll find this is kind of all over, it's very specific. So I think, but as far as I'm concerned, there's no better place than Silicon Valley. But I think that we better be aware of the fact that there's a lot of other, there are another, 327 million people around other places that, in the United States that
absolutely.
are important.
You want to finish up?
Well, great.
Yeah.
I mean,
Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
We could talk forever, but that's fine.
Yeah.
yeah, maybe one, or just conscious of the time, one last question, which is probably an unfair question, but I'd be interested to hear your thought about of what are you the most proud?
Well, I mean, I don't want to talk about that.
Okay.
I mean, I can tell you, I mean, sentimentally, I'm very proud of NEA. I mean, what,
Yeah.
Pretty well justified pride.
Yeah.
here I am, a guy from Green Bay, Wisconsin, and Appleton, Wisconsin.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Well-
dream big.
Well, that's a great answer.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
maybe
Perfect
that's a
answer.
perfect
Yeah.
note to end
Yeah,
on.
I think
I
that's a
you.
great note to end on.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
And congratulations. That's,
Thank you.
can't argue with that one.